Hello, I'm Piers. It's a great pleasure and privilege to be with you today to talk about the subject of self-transcendence next of the conference. When I'm very aware that this subject has a lot of authors in it, and it begs the question how it can be represented in a useful way. Does one choose one author only? Does one try and present more? And I found myself exploring how best to do this. So in the context of the presentation, we have the question that transcendence or self-transcendence is a term used in multiple literature and by a lot of authors. So I'm wanting to support understanding by portraying the sources together in one place. Now that's ambitious, and I felt I really want to try this. And I decided to use the image of a spiral to illustrate the possible proximity and connection between the definitions and their content. Is there a way, for example, I can show or I can point to them all on one sheet of paper on one diagram? So that was how I decided I would attempt this. So my proposal to you is that self-transcendence is a term used by many authors, and as such, it occurs in many places and times in our lives. It can be the question of self-transcendence in a single day, in a task, being in flow, during peak experiences, self-actualization, plateau experiences, and more. And it's clear that these experiences may overlap. So seen in this way, we might see our self-transcendence experiences connected across moments of time and in wider perspectives. This is what I'm endeavoring to portray for you, to illustrate for you, to unify this theory by seeing self-transcendence potentially as a spiral across its different presentations. So what is self-transcendence? There are a huge number of definitions. Now, it means, let's pick a few of them. It means to move beyond ourself, to go beyond ourself, to connect with something larger or more meaningful, to make connections and interconnections with ourselves, but with others, or potentially the wider world. So as a process, it explores the expansion of personal boundaries. It becomes an inclusive, holistic human consciousness. In this, we may get absorbed, fascinated, concentrated on something outside one's own psyche and situation, essentially transcending ourselves. And in doing so, we may forget ourselves. But if I mention to you that Maslow had 35 separate definitions which divide into process and content, it does illustrate that self-transcendence has the potential to be quite a big subject, appear in many places. So what about the question, my ambition of showing self-transcendence as a spiral? Now, it immediately illustrates that a spiral may have many points to it, many points where an aspect of self-transcendence could show. I'd suggest it probably works from the base to the top, and that there is overlap in spaces of the spiral that suggests we might move up and down within it. So there might be a smaller perspective or a wider perspective. I'd also suggest that in the variety of ways in which self-transcendence can be presented, we might be on more one level of a spiral simultaneously. It also raises the question, can it be used bidirectionally? May we find ourselves going up or down within the spiral? If we do that, to me, it transcends the tendency for us to need to feel fixed in moments of time. So if I take that as my starting point, the place on which I want to portray self-transcendence, let me take the next step. So I'm starting from what for me may be the smallest point. It's to say the occurrence of self-transcendence in the day. I'm using the work of Rollo May. Now, Rollo May was an existential psychologist as well as a psychotherapist and a hugely extensive author. He argued that transcendence is a natural part of our process of our humanity. And he was emphasizing it can occur, usefully occur, in every single day. He described it as an emergent evolution through a self-awareness and a reflectiveness that can occur every day, where we might stand outside a situation and in doing so, learn from it. We can perceive, transcend, and go beyond our immediate circumstances. What this does for us is it brings us into our being as constantly in the process of reflection and revision. What May is saying is when we adopt transcendence in a day, in his writing, for example, at the end of a day, we may pause, we may step, as it were, back from ourselves, and then explore and transcend the experiences of the day to make more sense of them for ourselves. So it's a first step in how we might portray self-transcendence. So we then take another step and say, well, okay, Rollo May says, or I was giving an example where Rollo May says, let's look at our transcendence occurring at the end of the day to make sense of it at the end of the day. But when we turn to the writing of Viktor Frankl and Paul Wong, he's saying that they're coming at it from a wider perspective, still daily, potentially, but they're presenting it as saying we must make sense of our existence. Our cognition, our attention, and focus will go beyond ourselves. As such, we're driven by our attention. And what Frankl says particularly, and Wong, is we are pulled towards meaning, finding meaning. Now, there's the beautiful expression of Viktor Frankl, where he says, life questions us. Now, if you think what that expression might mean, it's saying we're in relationship with the life around us. It has an implication that we're connected unavoidably to the life around us. And as such, that relationship puts us in a situation where life may raise questions for us. So a self-transcendence quality enters in as we process the meaning of an experience. Through finding meaning in an experience, we take responsibility for our lives and transform our own understanding and attitudes. So what we're picking up here is that self-transcendence, as it were, can be a step-by-step approach in which exploring an experience can give us insight into an experience. If we're going with Frankl and Wong, it's also challenging us to look for meaning within the experience and then decide what the implications are for that. So if we take a further step with this, the writing of Paul Wong, he proposes that self-transcendence in this way may result in situational meaning, our encountering our calling, or our ultimate meaning. So what might this mean? In the processing of an experience, situationally, we may look beyond the personal or the situation to the values or the spiritual. There's an important point here. It's saying we're not in the event alone. We're stepping beyond to wider insights, wider values and meanings. When we turn to seeking our calling, it's saying we will seek, pursue, and engage with a higher purpose or vocation than the event on its own. As such, it becomes we serve the greater good. And when we take the final step to the ultimate meaning, Wong says we're looking beyond the current context and looking for ways to connect ourselves to a transcendental meaning or realm. So we take another step here, which again takes us back to Viktor Frankl and his expression, life questions us. He's saying to us here, we have an innate compulsion to seek meaning. In the act of finding meaning, he says we're drawn forward. It could be through work, deed, or experience, or the attitude we may choose to adopt to an experience or an event we're in. We may at the same time grow through role models and mentors around us, and the suggestion that we will change and grow in the mirror of those with whom we relate, in our connection with role models or mentors that are meaningful to us. So self-transcendence extends and expands the boundaries of ourselves in four ways. And this is a beautiful, even classic definition from the work of Pamela Reed. By some, it is seen as perhaps one of the clearest definitions, where she's saying we will look at self-transcendence four different ways. We're looking intrapersonally within ourselves of our inner state, values and dreams, what something is meaning for us internally to ourselves. We then look interpersonally, how we relate to others and our environment. So meaning between me and someone else to whom I'm relating. She then says it's an act, a temporal act, how we see what's happening in the context of past time and future time. And finally, turning to transpersonally, connecting to dimensions beyond our personal world. So we now turn to looking at self-transcendence in the context of Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow. So if we pause for a moment and look at what the meaning of flow is, and then we connect it with self-transcendence. Csikszentmihalyi says we transcend the self by engaging in work, or particularly creative work that has challenges that are oriented to or perhaps slightly exceed our existent talents, strengths, and values. The task as such is big enough to absorb our attention and focus. In the act of doing so, our sense of self decreases. We become absorbed in the task and time. The the attention is coming out of me, away from me, to a task and becoming absorbed in it. The boundaries of the self relax as such, not so absorbed in myself, and become absorbed in the outer experience. So pulling this together, what he's saying is polarities occur in the experience of flow because we're growing. We're moving from the known to the unknown. Our attention is focused on an outer experience, which as such decreases our focus on our inner experience or self. Now, in the act of doing this, in the act of, as it were, surrendering myself, giving my attention over to the task I'm becoming absorbed in, it decreases the focus on the inner experience itself. And in this state, we incrementally develop our uniqueness. Csikszentmihalyi is saying we change incrementally in each experience of flow because we're growing incrementally in each experience. He says, in this form of transcendence, it's an evolution of our personality. Now pause on those terms because they're really powerful words. What Csikszentmihalyi is saying is when we give ourselves to flow, we differentiate, as in we blur, we mix, we move towards the task we're conducting, and then as we go through the experience and focus on it, we then consolidate. We differentiate ourselves, then we integrate and we consolidate ourselves. So he's arguing this is a process of small steps of growth. It's very powerful, very moving. I would draw your attention to the reference there. I've read much of Csikszentmihalyi's work, and that book particularly is very powerful. And the chapter that does look on the evolution of our personality, you'd think, how can a task be a personality? But he links the two together beautifully. So I would really advocate you look at that if you have the chance. So we're going to turn to Abraham Maslow's definition now of peak experiences. So peak experiences are intense experience, sensory, emotionally, a moment of awe or ecstasy or sudden insight into life, in which we experience a sense of powerful unity and in which it transcends space, time, and the self. It's as if I and what I'm viewing become one, become connected, become related, and feel as one. This level of perception is a tremendous concentration. He describes it as the most total visual, auditory, and or kinesthetic perception. Huge integration there, in which we're not evaluating, caring, or judging. It's an acceptance of everything in the experience. So the outside and our inside, as it were, become one. That is the peak experience. It's sudden, it's energetic, it's quite demanding and consuming of us. The ego becomes transcended, and the self and ego become forgetful. This is the words illustrating the point I've made. We give ourselves to the experience. We let go of ourselves, we let go of the ego, we become one with the experience. Reports of peak experiences suggest it gives meaning to life, and as such transcends polarities and conflicts. So powerful, intense experiences described by Maslow from his beautiful qualitative research. I'm making that point because I think some people kind of are less comfortable with Maslow, don't accept him quite so readily. But if we pause and think, his research of his time, qualitative research, and if you read his writing, you actually get a clear impression of the amount of care he put into it to understand what was coming through. So we take the next step for Maslow's work, self-actualization. Within the hierarchy of needs, actualizing ourselves, becoming who we most fully be. A drive to realize and fulfill our talents and potential. In the act of becoming more fully ourselves, we acquire a deeper understanding of our own nature. And this creates a trend towards, again, mirroring the previous experience, personal integration and unity. In this state, we're drawn to fulfill our calling. What are we called as a person to do? It creates a deeper sense of our own meaning and purpose. And it's important to emphasize, because in some of the writing about self-actualization, it's almost described as an endpoint, you get there and that's it. Now, Maslow's writing is very clear. Self-actualization isn't a static point. It's an ongoing process as we change and grow in time. Now, again, turning back to some of the points made earlier in the presentation, as we change and grow, we are transcending ourselves. It is self-transcendence in another form. So let's look at more of this. Whoops, excuse me, drop my mouse for a moment. So we're moving into lifespan developmental experiences. This is putting it in this way, it's quite a step. Lifespan theories suggest we process life experiences in periods of time and then mature as a result, transcend what was before, and extend our previous sense of self. So this is transcendence on a big scale, on a bigger scale, on a bigger perspective. All the references I've given you there are long-term, longitudinal developmental studies. The point is, aging is a continuous process involving our maturation in phases of time. We reevaluate the world around us and our place in it as time passes. So as our awareness of time passes, we start to say, who am I now? What am I becoming? The work of Lars Tornstam is, to me, very powerful because he illustrates transcendent shifts occur in our perception, how we meet the world. In this, we're talking about the cosmic experience, our experiences of the cosmos. How do I make sense of the world around me? How do I make sense of myself? And how do I, as myself, engage in social and personal relationships? What he says on the latter point, for example, is we'll tend to be more choosy, we'll tend to be calmer, we'll tend to be more serious as we move towards higher maturity. So what I would suggest, any of the references I've given you there are incredibly powerful. I love the work of Lars Tornstam. It's qualitative. He's got something in excess of 3,000 participants to his work. He takes people through it. He says that approximately 20% of his population had the transcendent experiences. So it's a lovely way of encountering this subject more fully. So now we're going to take another step, because we've got long-term lifespan development as a first step. We're turning now to what's called Maslow's, it's sometimes in the literature it's called a high plateau experience or the plateau experience. Now, let me put this in context for you. Maslow identified this experience after a major heart attack, but there was a relatively short time between one heart attack and the heart attack that eventually killed him, a small number of months. As he had these experiences of plateau experience, so note the difference, peak and plateau. He noted the experiences in contrast with self-actualization and peak experiences. He saw those two, self-actualizing and peak experiences, as intensely energetic, intensely sensory. He found the plateau experience calmer, more grounded and rooted in the present. It made him revise his views. It's important to tell you, looking at this bigger picture, that this particular work of Maslow's is undervalued and underrepresented in literature. It looks as what he's looking at mirrors some of what we've been talking about. It becomes a synthesis of dualities into a single unit. He's talking about focusing on the present moment, being in the present moment in everyday life. So pause for a moment and think about that experience. If I'm in the present moment, I'm not elsewhere. If I'm in the present moment, I'm more fully where I am. And what he's talking about is moving into that time and that state in his later life. He described how the sacred and the miraculous existed side by side. It existed beside the ordinary. And if you're familiar with the literature, what it is another way of saying is he was experiencing mystical states. Cleary, the man who's potentially done most work on Maslow's plateau experience, summarized it, I think, quite beautifully and briefly. He said the experience was opening the door to openness. It's a permanent state of being, an energetic stability, unlike peak experiences. So the emphasis here is present moment, seeing all of life essentially as potentially miraculous. The ordinary and the miraculous exist side by side. If we can see that, the world becomes a world of wonder. So let's take another step. And to me, you see, this is where the three blur together. And I'm very conscious I'm looking at self-transcendence and the lifespan growth and development, three different perspectives, because I think they have a real closeness. I want to try and bring that through to you. Now, the final one is Carl Jung's work on the transcendent function. So notice Jung doing this work, potentially doing the maths in my head, maybe 30, 40 years ahead of Maslow. He's labeling something the transcendent function. I think in the 1930s and 40s. He's talking about where our conscious and our unconscious become a whole. There's the recognition it is not one or the other. it's not two separate things. He's talking about a process when conscious and unconscious come together. In the act of doing this, polarities and opposites relate, reconcile, and come together. So as such, our wholeness via transcendence is a reconciliation of opposites and what's been called a bridge between the two. So notice the words here: polarities, opposites, things that we would not necessarily see as connected, unified in a single existence. And he's talking about a process by which the opposites become reconciled. And in the act of doing so, he talks about a third perspective emerging that's not one or the other. It's a third, separate, illustrative of the two. This is the important point to mention. It's a third state. It tends to be symbolic, perhaps in that kind of way. So it goes beyond words, beyond the rational, perhaps. So I'm giving you an example here, and I'm putting it as the transcendent function with a question mark. Because as I approached my work on the lifespan, positive psychology across the lifespan book, I had a very profound dream where I was witnessing the building of a bridge between a unique divide. And the building of the bridge was to create a whole and a unity. And in the context of the dream, I was being engaged in a state of wonder with the young people, the young men that were building the bridge. But at the same time, they were hugely enthused about the act and the beauty of writing. And so in the context of the dream, it seemed to be saying, build a bridge and allow myself to be absorbed into the beauty of writing. So that concludes the summary I've been trying to give you. But let me try and say it as one, not as separate parts. So what you've got here is my representation of the spiral as a whole. Now, remembering what I said earlier, we might go along the path of the spiral from one to another. So self-transcendence in daily experience to finding meaning, to flow, and so on. But I'm also suggesting that a spiral of this nature may find us entering the spiral at discrete points. So, for example, drawing on what Csikszentmihalyi says about the states in which we learn and attempt to contribute and grow, we might directly experience flow. We might directly experience peak experiences as sudden, surprising, energetic, absorbing, that we become absorbed into. So again, you have the illustration there. Flow talking about absorbing into a task. Peak experience talking about absorbing into the nature of the experience surrounding us. So the point I'm making here is that this is not a, as it were, linear spiral. Start from the bottom and work one's way up. It's a spiral that says we may make sense of self-transcendence in the day. We may find meaning in the day, or bigger. We may find experiences of flow, peak experiences. This may be examples of our self-actualization and our lifespan growth, but that we can move along around these experiences in different ways. So let me turn to my observations here. my experience in dealing with people is we tend to believe we are as we are now. When I deal with people looking at development, people almost take the stance, but I'm me now. But the message here, the point here is we cannot help but grow more. And it will occur inside and outside our awareness. Growth occurs in all of life, large faces and small events. So can we be open to that? As such, what we find, reflecting what Csikszentmihalyi's point, there are periods of stability where we know where we are, and there are periods of transition as we move to a different place. So we're talking here about a drive to grow, to look beyond ourselves, of ourselves. Note the point, look beyond and give of ourselves. We are unique and one with others. That's a beautifully important point, going back to the self-actualization. It's a point that came through to me reading Joseph Campbell's work on the hero's journey. He was saying the peak learning we have is we are unique as individuals. His expression was, there has never been someone like us on the earth before, nor will there be again. But in our uniqueness, we merge, we support, we live with the uniqueness of others. We support them and our own uniqueness. So transcendence is a thread from the small step to the bigger picture and the wholeness. So self-transcendence experiences exist on a spectrum of possibility, intensity, and choice. It can be a task, it can be localized in personal experience now, or it can be cumulative over time. We transcend ourselves in becoming ourselves. We transcend ourselves in giving of ourselves to others and learning while we do it. And in the giving of ourselves, we actualize our potential. I'm turning now to the references at the end. I've referenced material, but I've highlighted specific material that perhaps resonates most strongly with self-transcendence. So there's 3 pages of references particularly that relate to the talk I've just given. And there's a final page of references. Given I found that Maslow's plateau experience was so underrepresented in literature, I thought I'd give you 4 references that really bring this out. So thank you for your attention. Thanks again for my chance to be here. That concludes what I've got to say on this subject.
Thank you so much, Dr. Worth. So let's put our hands together for the pre-recorded sharing part. But we know Dr. Worth got a few more elaborations to chip in to let us further grasp deeper about his version of spiral self-transcendence. So maybe we pass the time to Dr. Worth to continue to do some elaboration if possible.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for it. I extended the presentation to try and illustrate and bring home that transcendence is something that is normal in every day. It happens. And yet when we're in professions like healthcare, it's an important aspect of our growth. So I took 5 examples from the presentation and endeavored to convert those into, as it were, an exercise, or 5 different types of exercises, to use them as self-reflective exercises in your own development. Now, could we just perhaps use one as an example? Dr. Lee, could you?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. Thank you. So I went back to Rollo May's work, which basically says we all think about the day. We're in the day, and at some point, usually at the end, it's absolutely natural for us to think about what the day was like, and draw some conclusions on it. Now, it's suggesting doing that perhaps in a more structured way, thinking back on the day, standing outside our situation, asking ourselves what we learned from our day to day. Is our experience of the day, of what we're doing, evolving, changing, moving? Are we seeing, feeling, understanding more of the day as a result of reflecting? It's, I think in my own dealings with people, it's very often when we think about the day, we're often drawn towards things we weren't comfortable with, we're judging. This is about perhaps taking a broader perspective and deliberately coming into a reflection to learn. So it's the argument that our coming into being is a constant daily process of reflection. And when we do it naturally, commonly, quickly. Could we go one slide further on?
Yep.
So moving into Wong's work, he would say, the Rollo May's work is rather broad. Just think broadly about it, step back and see it from a broader perspective. But Paul Wong says, no, structure it. Look at our situation. Can we learn more from the situation? Can we look at the values and the spirit that has a presence in our situation? Can we see anything in our situation that's about our calling, our higher purpose, our vocation, serving a greater good? Is there anything that's ultimate meaning? So it's another way of saying a similar one. If we could go one more slide just to illustrate. This is a particular favorite because it is written by someone who works as a nurse, and her ideas have fame in the healthcare professions. And she proposes we structure our reflections by looking intrapersonally into ourselves, interpersonally looking at ourselves and others, looking at time, and going to dimensions beyond our current personal world. So these are all different ways of saying, here's a way of structuring how we are conscious about transcending, learning, going beyond, and maybe extending our own insights. That's the goal there. So I'm assuming that the slides, including these exercises, are probably going to be available as an electronic handout. So it may take it further forward for you. That was all I had planned to say. So very open to questions if you wish.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Worth. So yeah, let's put our hands together for our speaker who spent a lot of time preparing for the talk all over the seats in the other part of the club. Now, the floor is open. If any questions anyone would like to raise here in regard to the spiral of self-transcendence. Yes, Alex.
Dr. Worth, this is Alex. Thank you so much for your inspiring talk. I think even though I heard it a second time. Yeah, but I really love it, actually. But I have a question because right now we encounter, because we are in college, we always for myself, actually, our research also kind of go out to the community, and then we kind of get in touch with a lot of people that feel hopelessness, or maybe they have, for example, like a student, they have a lot of traumatic experience, maybe in the past or maybe currently. Sometimes when it's hard for them to be mindful. It's hard for them to kind of reflect every day. So yeah, because every time when they look at the reflect the day, wow, they feel how they feel even more hopeless. So how do we handle this case, and what are your suggestions?
Oh, deep breath. That's a big question. I would, two things come to me. One is that reflecting is normal. We will do it. You know, it could be on the walk to the bus or the train at the end of the day. It may be something. Can we catch ourselves to be a little bit more attentive and a bit more structured about how we do that? Can we learn through that? Now, okay, let me go into the other side of what you said, because I'm very aware that the working world is not straightforward. It can be very tough. It can be yeah, more than tough for some of us. I'm going to take a chance and go. I the biggest lesson I've had is the small things. When I try and look at impact, you know, I think we think about bigger things, and time again, I find the act of doing small acts of care in the day, perhaps with almost out of sight for another person, I think they become cumulative, and they are a form of influence. And that's a form of practice I incorporate in a day that I find busy or overwhelming. Can I be attentive and caring towards another person in their point of need? It may be only a small number of minutes, but but they recur. They do recur in our day. That's my attempt at it. Now, I can see there's some questions in the chat. So how would you like to go on from this?
Yes, Dr. Worth, there are some questions in the text box. I think we may well pick up some to go through. Well, for example, Ms. Lau Yunqing asked that if these definitions of the spiral self-transcendence is, well, rather a subjective feeling. And at the same time, I think in particular, TC, I think should be our beloved teacher, right? He raised quite two in-depth questions. He was asking, well, could the 7 definitions of ST be combined? Well, are there potential conflicting ideas within it? And at the same time, TC comment that while it may be a good idea to use a spiral metaphor to combine similar concepts together, but can it be more clarified version of why some are positioned higher, some positioned lower in the spiral? He pointed out that maybe the first two are rather, well, dissimilar to the rest. And how are these points being picked up, and how are they ordered? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. And I agree. This was my attempt to make sense of a range of literature, and the literature overlaps.
Right.
So that's why some things that look similar sit near together. I took Rollo Mace first because he was deliberately talking about the day.
True.
And transcendence in a day. And generally, I've moved up in my view, in terms of time, so units of time, and potentially units of complexity. So, for example, when you get to flow, Csikszentmihalyi is talking about the balance between challenge and attention, and can we absorb ourselves and let ourselves go into it. So yes, the spiral was my attempt to make sense of quite a lot of writers who tend to say one thing, they look separate, they're written separately, and I was trying to bring them together. Points like they look similar, they overlap, they do. So I'm not saying this could not be improved. It was my best shot in the time I had.
Yeah, for sure.
Does that cover the answer?
Oh, I do think so. While I also have some query like TC, personally, I think, Dr. Worth, framework is very comprehensive. It brings together things we've been very familiar over the years, like the flow, self-actualization, which you connect them together. Despite that, there may be some overlapping areas, but I do think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so at the same time, if anyone would like to raise questions, yes, please.
If somebody can see a way of making it smaller, I would say go.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Dr. Worth. My question actually right on Dr. Alice Chan's question as well. And my work, while I'm working with the new generation, my experience that they are actually quite insightful. They can create insights that our older generation cannot think of sometimes. However, they're situating in a community or this generation with a lot of complexity, like more information from AI, technology, or other challenges that they face just that unique in this generation. So my question is that the spiral, the processing journey, is with the complexity of experience that the generation experiencing, would that hinder them from engaging in that processing journey? And how we can assist them to dive into this spiral of growth? Yes, that's my question. Thank you.
And a beautiful question, thank you. And you probably see the expression on my face. Whoa, this is a good question. It's interesting, Lars. I'm going to go back to front, and I've got one eye on the clock. Lars Tornstam's work, particularly with older people, qualitative, suggests levels of insight that are not in younger generations. So I'd say the levels of insight are different to the different to the age ranges, and I think we may come on to that in the workshop. I feel a huge amount of empathy for younger people at the moment, and at this age, I'm in my 70s now, so I'm going younger than me, but yes, youngers, 20s, 30s, 40s, that the range of complexity there. I acknowledge it's there, and I think one has to do one's best in understanding what's in front of us and bringing it attention and compassion. The biggest learning for me in the last 10 years has been the influence of small acts, and that they are cumulative. Small acts have a power that I never credited but before this phase in my life, because and I'm not meaning done by older people, I'm meaning done by any person, and the influence on the younger people. bit of a fumble dance, a bit of falling over myself. I hope there's some sense in there for you.
I just witnessed some kind of self-transcendence on your face and our fellow colleagues' face during this dialogue engagement, which is brilliant. Well, maybe we have time for one or at most two questions before we go to the next section. If anyone would like to raise any query or make some comments here.
And there's one question up there. Can we ask for a copy of the presentation? I said I assume the slides would be passed around. Anything more than that, I leave that at your discretion.
Yep. I think that's available too, right, Alex? Yep. All right.
Yeah, actually, for all the PowerPoints and recordings, we'll gather from the speakers, and then we will share. And then for the recordings, because for the pre-recording is only part of it, because we also have the discussion. I think that's the important part in the Q&A. So I think we will put the video on YouTube and then share later. And we also will create a leaflet, and then with the videos and QR code. And Dr. Wolf, again, thank you so much. And I totally agree with you. Maybe we should focus on some small thing each day.
Sure.
Yeah, I remember that when my mom kind of was dying because suffering with lung cancer, and also at the end of life stage, we kind of talk to her the same thing every day, and then she kind of remember those thing, just that thing that day, and then the next day we repeat the same thing. And I think that's very important. We treasure that moment of interaction. I think kind of also help her to not focus on the painful experience, but focus on the grateful experience as well. But I think it's important. But I think we will have more interaction, right, in the workshop. Can you hear what I said?
Yeah, I am. Forgive me. I'm putting my hand to my ear because I am very deaf. So I'm just giving my hearing aids a little bit more help by putting my hand to my
But
ear.
good. But I think again, I think it's hard to just say it. I think transcendence, I think we need to practice it and live it out. I think that's very important. I think. Okay, but I think we need to take maybe 10 minutes break, and then after we come back, I think Dr. Wolf will lead us for some kind of interactive reflective exercise. Yeah, I think we also collect some response over the past few days, because we already sent out the reflective exercise maybe on Wednesday already, and or maybe Tuesday, and also the QR code for assessing the reflective exercise. Maybe we can show the QR code. If people hasn't filled it out, you can do it right now. Yeah, and then but right now we will take a 10 minutes break, and then we'll come back at 4:40. So your time should be 9:40, right? Right now it's 9:30, right?
It's 9:30 this end.
Yeah, 9:30. So we will start the workshop at 9:40.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Just fine.
Yeah, just take a break first. Okay, thank you.